Okay, let's dive in. We're looking at something pretty momentous today, the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Absolutely. A huge geopolitical shift. It didn't just redraw maps, it really ended an entire era. Decades of Cold War tension just dissolved.
Right. And we've got a lot of pieces to look at, so our mission here is to sort of pull out the key threads, see how they connect.
Sounds good. We'll look at the people, the policies, the pressures, both inside and out.
Think of it as trying to understand, how this giant structure actually came apart. It gets really interesting when you dig into the details.
It really does. It wasn't just one thing, as we'll see.
So maybe the best place to start is with some of the key names and ideas floating around back then.
Good idea. Lay the groundwork.
First up, Ronald Reagan, U.S. president for a big part of this period. What was his role, broadly speaking?
Well, Reagan took a very firm line against the Soviet Union, challenged them ideologically, ramped up military spending, put external pressure on the system.
Okay. And then on the Soviet side, you have Mikhail Gorbachev, comes in mid-'80s.
Right. Gorbachev, he's crucial. He saw the problems, the economic stagnation, the discontent, and he tried to implement major reforms.
Reforms we'll definitely get back to. What about Afghanistan? That keeps popping up.
Ah, yes. The Soviet war in Afghanistan.
Mhm.
Fought throughout the 80s. It was incredibly costly.
Costly how? Like financially?
Financially, yes, a huge drain,
Mhm.
but also in terms of lives lost, military resources, and public morale back home. It became their sort of Vietnam.
Right, I see. Okay, and then there's Star Wars, not the movie, obviously.
No, definitely not the movie. Officially, the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI. This was Reagan's idea for a space-based missile defense system.
To shoot down incoming nukes.
That was the concept, yeah. Now, whether it was actually feasible back then is, well, debatable, but the idea of it,
The idea was enough.
it put immense pressure on the Soviets. They worried it could shift the nuclear balance, forcing them to spend even more money. They didn't really have to try and counter it or keep up.
Okay, interesting. Now, those Gorbachev reforms we mentioned, Glasnost and Perestroika, what were they exactly?
So glasnost basically means openness. Gorbachev wanted more transparency, more freedom of speech, less censorship, let people talk about the problems.
And Perestroika.
That means restructuring. This was aimed at the economy, trying to make the rigid, centrally planned Soviet economy more efficient, maybe introduce some market-like elements.
Trying to fix things from within.
Exactly. That was the goal.
Then, shifting focus a bit, we have Lech Walesa and Solidarity in Poland.
Right. Walesa led Solidarity, which is this independent trade union movement in Poland, started in the shipyards
And they were significant because
because they represented a massive organized challenge to communist rule within the Soviet bloc. It showed widespread popular opposition was possible and really inspired others. A crack in the edifice.
a powerful example.
Yes.
And then maybe the most famous symbol, the Berlin Wall.
Ah, the wall.
Yeah.
For decades, it was the physical embodiment of the Iron Curtain, dividing East and West Berlin, East and West Europe, communism and democracy.
Its fall in '89. Just iconic.
Absolutely pivotal. When that wall came down, it signaled that the communist grip on Eastern Europe was dramatically weakening. Change felt unstoppable then.
Which leads directly to reunification, right? Germany becoming one country again.
Exactly. The fall of the wall made German reunification possible, which happened incredibly quickly, actually. Another sign of the shifting power dynamics.
And this wasn't just happening in places like Germany and Poland. Inside the Soviet Union itself, Lithuania comes up.
Yes, Lithuania was one of the Baltic republics within the USSR, and inspired by everything happening, they declared independence.
A direct challenge to Moscow.
A huge challenge. It questioned the very integrity of the Soviet Union itself. If republics could just leave, well, what was left?
Things are clearly starting to unravel. Which brings us to the August coup. What was that?
The August coup of 1991. This was a desperate move by hardline communist officials. They tried to overthrow Gorbachev, stop the reforms, turn back the clock.
How did that go?
It failed. Spectacularly, actually. There was popular resistance, people in the streets, especially in Moscow, and its failure completely undermined the old guard.
And that's where Boris Yeltsin becomes really important.
And precisely. Yeltsin was the leader of the Russian Republic within the USSR. He famously stood on a tank, rallied resistance against the coup, His profile soared.
So he positioned himself against the coup leaders.
Yes, and against the old Soviet center. He championed Russian sovereignty, and after the coup collapsed, he was instrumental in the final steps that led to the formal dissolution of the Soviet Union just months later, in December of '91.
Wow. Okay, so we've laid out the pieces. Now let's really try to connect them. The war in Afghanistan, you said it was a drain. How deep did that go?
Really deep. Think about it, years of fighting, thousands of casualties, billions of rubles poured into it. That's money and resources, not going into fixing the crumbling Soviet economy or improving living standards.
And it hurt morale too, you said.
Definitely. Became deeply unpopular. People started questioning the government's judgment, the human cost. It bred cynicism.
Okay. And layered on top of that, you have Reagan's policies, the Star Wars Initiative. How did that external pressure really work?
It forced the Soviet leadership into a difficult position. Reagan's rhetoric was challenging, and the U.S. military buildup, particularly the high-tech stuff like SDI, made them feel they had to compete.
Even if SDI wasn't fully realistic at the time.
Even then, the fear was that the U.S. might achieve a breakthrough, neutralizing the Soviet nuclear deterrent. So they felt compelled to divert scarce resources towards matching it, further stringing their already struggling economy. It was strategic and economic pressure combined.
So facing these pressures, Gorbachev brings in glasnost and perestroika, intended to save the system, right?
That was the intention, yes. Revitalize socialism, make it more efficient, more humane. Perestroika was meant to fix the economy.
Which was in bad shape.
In very bad shape. And Glasnost was supposed to build support for these changes by allowing critique and open discussion.
But glasnost had unintended consequences.
Oh, massively. It was like opening a Pandora's box. Once people felt they could speak freely, decades of suppressed anger, frustration, nationalist feelings, historical grievances, it all came pouring out.
So instead of just critiquing past mistakes, people started questioning the whole system.
Exactly. The criticism went far beyond what Gorbachev likely anticipated or wanted. It eroded the authority and legitimacy of the Communist Party itself.
And while this is happening internally, you've got examples like Solidarity in Poland showing resistance works.
Right. Solidarity was a powerful symbol. It showed that a communist government could be successfully challenged by its own people. That resonated across Eastern Europe and even within the Soviet republics. It gave hope to opposition movements.
Then the Berlin Wall falls. That must have just accelerated everything.
It was like a dam breaking. Visually, symbolically, politically. It was immense. It showed the Soviet Union was either unwilling or unable to prop up the regimes in Eastern Europe anymore.
And that emboldened places like Lithuania.
Absolutely. Seeing the changes in Eastern Europe, seeing the weakening control from Moscow, nationalist movements within the Soviet republics gained momentum. Lithuania's declaration of independence was a bold step, followed by others. The Union itself was starting to fracture.
So the foundations were crumbling. And the August coup was like a desperate attempt to shore them up.
You could see it that way. The hardliners saw the Union dissolving and tried to seize power to stop it. But their failure was just as significant.
How so?
It demonstrated how little power they actually had left. The public, especially in Russia led by Yeltsin, didn't support them. The army was divided. It fatally weakened Gorbachev's position too, even though he was the one they tried to oust. Power shifted dramatically towards the leaders of the individual republics, especially Yeltsin in Russia.
So, bringing it all together, it really wasn't just one thing.
Not at all. It's a complex picture.
You've got these long-term problems like the inefficient economy, the lack of freedom.
Right, the internal weaknesses that were there for decades.
Then you add the strain of Afghanistan, the external pressure from the U.S. and Reagan, the arms race.
Those external factors exacerbating the internal issues.
And then Gorbachev tries to fix it with glasnost and perestroika, but glasnost kind of unleashes forces he can't control.
Exactly. The reforms themselves, ironically, accelerated the process.
Plus the inspiration for movements like Solidarity, the huge symbolic impact of the Berlin Wall falling.
Showing that change was possible, that the old system was losing its grip.
And the push for independence from republics like Lithuania, capped off by the failed August coup, which really broke the back of the central government.
It all converged. The long-term decay, the immediate pressures, the reform attempts that backfired, the rise of alternative power centers like Yeltsin, it led to the dissolution.
So this superpower that had defined so much of the 20th century just ceased to exist, leading to a whole new global landscape.
A profoundly different world order emerged. The end of the Cold War, new countries, new challenges. Its impact is still felt very strongly today.
Well, this deep dive hopefully gives everyone listening a clearer picture of just how many factors were at play. It wasn't simple.
No, history rarely is. It's usually a confluence of events, decisions, and underlying forces.
So, to wrap up and give you something to think about further, consider these questions.
Okay.
First, if you had to pick one, what do you think was the single most decisive factor in the Soviet collapse and why? Was it internal decay, external pressure, Gorbachev's reforms, something else?
That's a tough one. Forces you to weigh them.
Second, how might things look different today if the Soviet Union hadn't collapsed? If it had somehow reformed and survived?
Speculative, but interesting to ponder the alternate paths.
And finally, what lessons, if any, can we draw from the Soviet collapse about the challenges that large centralized states or empires faced throughout history?
Are there recurring patterns, maybe? Good questions to mull over.
Definitely some food for thought there. We've really only scratched the surface, of course. Thanks for diving deep with us.
My pleasure. It was a great discussion.